am live on Facebook. So we're going to get rolling. So welcome everybody. I'm going to kick things off once I pull my notes up. Well, good evening to everybody on Zoom and on the YouTube channel. Welcome to the General Baker Institute. My name is Craig Register, and I'm a lecturer at U of M Ann Arbor and one of the planners for this series, Detroiters Speak. And we are thrilled to be here. This is the 6th session out of a 7-part series that is called Making Labor Work, Organizing for Power in the 21st Century. And we've had some awesome discussions and speakers over the last several weeks, first on Zoom and for the last 3 weeks here in person back at the GBI. So we're really excited to be here. A little bit more about the community classroom. Some of those in the audience have heard this, some of you out in YouTube land perhaps not. But this is a public classroom series that joins together U of M students, Wayne State students, students of life, students in life, anybody in the general public who wants to come in and listen. And there's a really great team of folks, including our awesome tech person, Carolyn Baker, who also has helped plan the sessions, Miku, who's enjoying his second chicken shawarma, who's also enjoyed and helped plan sessions, Ryan, who just left, David Goldberg from Wayne State, Valerie, Kadisha from the GBI. It's a real group effort to put this class together. So we're really happy that you're here in whatever form, whether you're in person or virtually joining us. And tonight's theme, we have some awesome speakers. I can't wait to turn this over to them in a minute. It's called Public Sector Workers Against Austerity. And I hope by the end of the evening, we'll have a much better understanding of what is this public sector we're talking about, what is austerity, and why the hell should we be against it? And so obviously that'll come out in the conversation and in your questions. And I just wanted to say a few things to maybe frame the evening. Throughout the series, we've heard from a wide range of activist organizers and workers, right? From Detroit, from throughout the country and over Zoom. We had somebody from New Jersey, from New York City a couple of weeks ago. Last week, we had a Chilean American activist, right, who's talked a lot about what happened in Chile a couple of years ago. And so we understand here in the GBI that everything we're talking about these are international issues. These are global issues. And so while we may today, we're probably going to talk more specifically about Detroit than we did last week. We understand that the issues we're talking about here are linked to struggles throughout the world and throughout time, really, in many respects. So before I go any further, though, I want to ask you all a question, which is, when I say public sector, what do you all think about? And maybe if you're on Zoom, you can throw something up, or if you're on YouTube, you can do that as well. But let's start with folks in the room. So what is this public sector? What does that mean to you? You saw the title, so you tell me, and you don't have to raise your hand out there in the audience. When you hear public sector, what do you think of?
I think of the superstructure.
Okay. The superstructure. All right. That's huge. That's super in many ways, right? What about particular types of work? Anything come to mind? Particular occupations or industries? Yeah.
Like construction.
Construction? The public, so maybe construction workers who may be working for a city or a municipality, right? In many ways, we think about public sectors, including governmental workers, right? So that could be maybe not exactly what you were thinking, but related to if a city is hiring people to do construction, there's a public sector that's involved, right? Government money. What else? Other sectors, other types of work that we might call public sector work.
Teachers.
Teachers, that's a huge one, right? We got some teachers up here. Even if we're not formally teachers, which we are, Victoria. I mean, we may be teachers in other ways, but certainly, right? Public education. I believe many of you go to a public university, right? Part of the public sector. I work for the public sector. Some people call U of M the privatist public university in the world, right? And I don't think privatist is a word, but you know what I mean. So education. In fact, I think one of the largest subsections of public sector work are education workers, public school teachers, all the other folks who work as a part of the school systems, which we'll talk about. Others, what are we forgetting? Are there any big ones we're forgetting?
Postal
Workers. Happen to have somebody who knows a little bit about that. So we don't need Amazon, we have the post office, right? Okay, whatever, that's a longer conversation, but as far as we already have people who bring things to our houses every day, right? We have for a long time. Postal workers. Sorry? Hospital. Public hospitals, right? Something that perhaps is dying over time. That's its own conversation, but public health, public hospitals, public systems of health. So these are all great ones. There's some maybe not so fun ones. Cops. corrections, private prisons, of course, are becoming a thing, but for a very long time and still to this day, we have publicly funded and operated prison systems, right? So there's the whole corrections industry, which in many ways could be considered is part of the public sector.
So what would NASA be called?
NASA?
Yeah,
Well, I believe NASA would be part of the public sector, right? That's a federal branch of the federal government, right? I could be wrong.
Sure.
That's a great question, and maybe we'll bring that in. So I don't know. Maybe you can tell us more in the conversation later. Any other final ones? I had a hand over here.
A public defender.
Public defender, so the whole court system, right? Public sector, absolutely. So there's more that we can include, but let me ask you a question and just a few more framing remarks. Do you have any idea, we talked a lot about unions in this series. Do you have any idea of what the unionization rate, in other words, the number of folks in unions in the public sector in 2021? Does anybody have a guess? What was the percentage of workers in the public sector who are in unions last year? Any guesses?
2.
2%. It is higher than that. Not high enough, but it's a lot higher. It's actually a lot higher than that. 33%. So about 1 in 3. So 1 in 3. Right. What about the private sector? Does anybody have a guess? What's the unionization rate of the private sector, private companies in 2021 in this country? I'm talking about US.
15.
It's definitely lower. It's even lower than that. 6%. 6%. So 1 in 16 workers in this country in 2021, 1 in 16 who work for a private company are in a union. 1 in 3 who work in the public sector are in a union. So, and I can't speak to, if David Goldberg was here, perhaps he could, maybe others can, exactly the sort of the historical background behind that. But for a very, very long time, I think almost forever, in fact, public sector unionization rates have been much higher than the private sector. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what's happening tonight. And one of the things I just want to make one other point about the public sector, which is as we already demonstrated, it's a very wide and diverse array of types of work, right? And also those unions that represent public sector workers are themselves very diverse, even within the same union. And so I'm a member of the AFT. I believe you're a member of the DFT, which is part of the AFT, right? And so the American Federation of Teachers, this is a great example. So you can go, the American Federation of Teachers represents, sorry. Okay, right. So we got some thoughts about that, right? We're going to hear about that. But that's the parent union. And it also, the DFT is a part of the AFT. It's connected. So is the Chicago Teachers Union, right? And so these are two very different versions of what a teachers union might look like. And I'm sure Tori will have more to say about that. Same parent union, same sector, education, two very different kind of manifestations of what a union can look like, at least in the last 5 years, if not much longer than that, right? So even if the public sector itself has a high unionization rate, within it, there's a lot of diversity of types of work, and the unions themselves can look very different in one place to another. And so these are just sort of some opening thoughts that I wanted to share. So let me introduce the panelists, who have a whole lot to say about this and much more. So I was asked, I asked folks to give me some introductions, and these are just kernels of what they are and what they've done, because most of them were really modest. They didn't give me a whole lot. In fact, all of them compared to last week gave us pages. But anyways, you all could have given us much more. And so let me first introduce, and this is just the order I have them here, but we may bounce around with the questions if that's okay. So all the way over here in the awesome chair that I also sit in. It's a nice feeling chair, isn't it? We have Harvey of Big City Wilson. He likes to go by Big City. And Big City has done many things in his life. Am I too loud, by the way? Last week we were screaming. Is this good? Is the volume good? Okay. So Harvey was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and graduated from Cass Tech High School. He worked 32 years at Ford Motor Company, and for 15 of those years was a representative in his union, the UAW. Yes? Yep. He has been driving buses. In addition to all that, he's been driving buses for 26 years and for multiple school systems. And we're going to hear about that later. And he has sat at the feet of General Baker, and we should always lift up General Baker's name when we're here, for 33 years. So thank you, Big City, for being here. We have Tori Anderson right over here to my right. Tori is an MAED and an MED, which I was going to read out and pronounce, but you can explain. Master's of Arts in Education.
Six figures worth of student loan.
There we go. Just a little bit of
6 figures worth of student loan debt. 3 degrees.
Student loan debt, absolutely.
But y'all know that's actually kind of, you got to give it a mic.
My bad. Well, you can say more in a sec. Sorry. There's another mic right there, by the way, which we're going to be using in a second. So Tori believes that education is liberation. She believes that education is a human right and everyone deserves a high-quality education. She aims to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline and systematic racism in education by any means necessary. Her long-term goals include developing policy which protects the rights of marginalized students and people in her community. Tori is also the author of Revolutionary Girls, a picture book which encourages young girls and women to speak out about social issues. In her spare time, when she's not online, advocating for educators, students, and public education, Tori can be found lounging, reading a book. Thank you, Tori, for being here. We have Jane Duggan, a few people down with an awesome red shirt on. Jane has been a lifelong activist, began organizing in the early 60s. In the early 70s, she decided to organize among industrial workers and worked in the steel, auto, and airline industries. In 1980, she entered the U.S. Postal Service, where she spent much of her career in technical maintenance. As a long-serving union official, she was asked to head an educational experiment that became a template for training nationwide. On the forefront of women and non-traditional work, she has been a fighter for diversity in the workplace. Jane also taught briefly at Oklahoma University before being elected full-time secretary treasurer of the American Postal Workers Union in Detroit. She's active in organizing around labor and community issues and currently serves as the secretary treasurer of the Michigan Postal Workers Union, or MPWU, retiree chapter. So thank you, Jane. We really appreciate you being here. Finally, let me introduce Praveen Loganathan. Did I say it right?
Yeah, sure.
You can correct me.
I'll do my own.
All right. Well, Praveen, who goes by he, they pronouns, is an organizer with Detroit Will Breathe and a member of the AAUP Faculty Staff Union at Wayne State University. His work empowers students to find their voice and understand neoliberalism's attack on public infrastructure, which I'm sure we'll hear more about. So thank you, Praveen. So one of you can grab that mic because I'm going to start throwing questions at you. Maybe Jane, you can take it off of that device because you're going to start passing it around. I can also pass it around. And kind of like we did in the last several weeks, I think this works pretty well. We start with a few short questions, kind of get some conversation going. And then we give each of our speakers a chance to talk a little bit more deeply about their work, the campaigns they're working on, some of the lessons they want to share. And so they know the questions, but hopefully they remember the first one, which was, why don't we start with, what is this public sector? We kind of began brainstorming and talking about, the different types of work that fits into it, but why is it important to you? Why is the public sector work that you're a part of, or just the public sector more broadly, important to you? Why do you think it should be important to us? So that's 4 different ways to ask the same question. The public sector and why it's important to you. Any of you can start, take a minute or two, pass the mic around, and we'll just start hearing from you. Thank you.
Since I'm holding the mic, I'll start. I think the main thing about the public sector is that it's a service. It doesn't exist to make a profit. And they're always trying to change that, but that's the bottom line. And so public sector workers, when we fight back, we don't just fight for ourselves, we fight for the people we serve. So teachers allied with parents and students fight for students, fight for better classrooms. Bus drivers fight for the riders that they serve and protect. Postal workers who deliver to 160 million spots every single day. When we fight for all the people we serve so that you're going to get your medication, your checks, and your love letters regularly and on time.
I'm going to give you this mic too in case you all want to pass it around. Go ahead.
I guess to add on to that, I think that in this profession, we signed up to be public servants, right? And I feel there's a certain level of respect for the work that we do that should come along with that, that we don't get. And, it's, hey, y'all, I'm here to serve you, but, why aren't you treating me well? Why are you coming on my bus and why are you cussing me out? Or why are you complaining that, the mail is running late and it's, can I cuss?
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't do respectability politics. Why it's fucking raining? Like, why are you constantly hiking, college tuition, to the point where students can't even afford to register for classes, so now I have to lay off faculty. So we're servants, but I also feel like we don't get the respect we deserve. That's my spiel.
I like what was said, we're servants, and most of the companies that are public sector, they're supposed to be, theoretically, they're supposed to be nonprofit. We are public servants, and you have to enjoy what you do. Otherwise, you won't do it. Because all of us, I'm pretty sure in the public sector, we've ran into some horrible experiences and we perhaps wanted to walk away, but our love for what we do kept us there. Again, it's theoretically, it's supposed to be nonprofit. Theoretically, it's supposed to be a good paying job with benefits and a pension at the end. Theoretically, it's supposed to be like that. It don't always work like that, but it's supposed to. Again, it's nonprofit, and I say this all the time. Church is a public sector entity, but their pastors mostly are capitalist and for-profit. That's why they got big jets flying all around the world. I mean, you can't be nonprofit and got a $30 million private jet, but under the guise of nonprofit. Again, we're public servants. And again, I'm gonna say this one more time, we have to love what we do or we wouldn't do it.
They hit it spot on. When Craig asked the question, what is a public good or who works at it? Back in the day, you could have said anything that would have been right. A lot of what we did, even if you lived in Detroit and you were a garbage man in Detroit, it was a public good. They paid you a pension, you were serving the public. They weren't trying to make profit from collecting your trash. But then the city made this thing that, oh, well, it'd be run better if it's run by a for-profit company. So now we give contracts to companies to pick up trash and hire workers. Workers are going around faster, higher turnaround. But at the end of the day, when you look at a public good, it's supposed to be free. It's a free service that is provided to everybody and no one is excluded. But when you take a public good and you try to include it in the free market, you're trying to force something into a private good. And that means people have to be excluded, or the labor that works for that good have to be oppressed and marginalized. And that is why over the years, they've used policies to say, if we can break this public good up, we can also break up the unions. And if we break up the unions, we can start making competition so that when workers get paid less and they're more stressed out and they don't have power to argue. So it's a constant changing theme about public goods.
That's exactly what happened.
Any other, before we move to the second, this is already a great discussion. So are there any other responses to what each of you just heard from each other, or anything else you hear that you want to add on to? For this
I
opening
think
question.
just what
Can you use the
Praveen,
mic, Jane? Thank you.
what Praveen just said is really important, and I'll talk about it more later, but this whole drive to privatization, and like in the post office, I call it the brother-in-law deal, that if you take a huge public service and you break it up into 10 smaller, affordable pieces, your brothers-in-law can buy them and make a profit.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Well, let's go to the second question. Hey, Tristan, welcome back. Please grab a sandwich. So that's a great opening. You already laid some great groundwork. So the second question that I gave you, this big word austerity, right? It's thrown around all over the place. And I think we need to break it down a little bit. And maybe I thought a good way to do that was the second question, which is if each of you could give us one example that comes to mind of how austerity has impacted your workplace. Maybe it's your current workplace, maybe it's a previous workplace, maybe it's somebody else's workplace you know of, but how have you seen austerity in action? Beyond the obvious, which is some of what we already talked about, which is like cutting jobs, paying people less. Are there other ways you've seen it unfold or that you want to add to?
Well, I mean, this one's easy, education. So maybe can I ask them a question?
Of course.
I work for one of the largest public school systems in the state of Michigan. We have over 150 schools. How many librarians do you think my school district has?
Wow.
That's a question. How many?
Throw out a number.
Throw out a number.
Two.
Two? Anybody else?
I'm gonna go with 5.
How many do you wish they had?
We have one.
One for the whole district.
One librarian for the entire district. So that is how budget cuts impact my job.
Hey, can I ask a question about the public library? What about the public, there used to be a public library downtown Detroit. Is that one still there?
Well, that's public libraries. I'm talking about like librarians in the school district.
In the public
So
school.
libraries that are open for students to use
Oh,
throughout
okay,
the
okay.
school day.
Wow.
So, yeah.
How
Wow.
many students in the district? Sorry, go ahead, I'll just keep going, we'll go on.
Well, yeah, librarians are a great example. I mean, at Wayne State, we were founded with a union for faculty, staff, and librarians are now part of our union. So they're represented, but if they were not part of the union, guess what? We would have a lot less of librarians. So that's really important. And the services don't just affect us, they affect you. So when you talk about making things simple, there's this common, what they're trying to do is label any extra support services as entitlements. Oh, you're getting an entitlement. We're trying to help social problems by fixing it with entitlements. So entitlements are bad. Instead, we want to give you the free market can do it more efficiently. And that's where this law and code come in and they start breaking up things again. If you're a public good, you never call anything entitlement. You're like, this is my tax dollars, this is my voice, this is what's happening. But the way the free market changes it, goods that everyone should have access to become entitlements and they're costing too much for us to use.
So I think, Craig, you mentioned reducing numbers, but the thing that I think has most impacted the post office is over a long period of years, more than 10 years, they simply have not hired. So that means longer hours. But then when you throw COVID in the mix, it's just become a total cluster. And you have a lot of people were off from COVID because we work real close together in the post office like this. I work a lot closer than I am to big city office. So it's easy to transmit that. So what the result has been, and this is, I meet every Sunday night on Zoom with postal organizers from the whole country, coast to coast, all 4 unions. This is everywhere, not just in Detroit, that people are now working 12 and even 14 hours a day, mandatory, 6 and 7 days a week. So in one of my sisters who lives in Chicago told me her letter carrier comes around 9 o'clock at night and he has a light like a miner would wear under the earth on his cap so he can see the mail and the addresses.
Wow.
That's austerity.
Do you all does postal workers get paid overtime?
Yes.
Is it actually covering what they want or are they limiting things?
A lot of postal workers last year, I understand, made like way over $100,000 because they were working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I can tell you when I had to work overtime, I found it was very expensive because I bought more ready-made food. I didn't go home and cook every night. I picked something up on my way home. So you pay a price even economically for overtime. Postal workers do make overtime like in the big unions like I'm part of, but for instance, rural letter carriers, they're like garment workers. They get paid by the piece. And I don't think they don't make anywhere the kind of money that letter carriers or mechanics like me or clerks would make.
But it's cheaper to pay you overtime than to hire another worker.
Right, because you only pay for one insurance,
Right.
one vacation.
Yeah, wow. Austerity, doing as much as you can with as less as possible.
Yep.
Let me clarify, I'm a school bus driver. And most school bus companies, if not all of them, have rules now that they never had before. You cannot idle your bus more than 10 minutes. So on a cold February morning or January morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, you can only let your bus run for 10 minutes. That means 3/4 of your ride picking up children to take them to school, your bus is ice cold. And we asked the owner, why? What's this new rule about? Oh, I got to conserve on the fuel costs. In the meantime, I'm cold. I'm going to catch the flu. Even if we go on field trips, we pick up a school and take them to the theater to watch a movie. It's wintertime again, it's cold outside. Once we drop them off at the theater and park the bus, within 10 minutes, we got to cut that bus off.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that only for Detroit bus drivers?
No, that's about 85 to 90% of your school districts, because what they got on the buses is called Zonar.
No, I'm asking.
I'm sorry.
I'm asking as far as like the privatization of buses. Like, is Detroit the only one that has cut transportation?
No,
Okay,
no. Most of your school districts have privatized.
austerity.
Yeah, exactly right. And we're gonna talk about that a little later. But most of your school districts, they have privatized, I guess I can say this right quick now. Most of your school districts have privatized bus services because at one time, school districts had their own buses, which you probably know, and they was getting good pay. Every time the teachers get a raise, the bus drivers get a raise, had the same benefits as the teachers, and we had pension at the end of 25, 30 years. All that's gone through privatization, austerity, all that's gone. All you get now when you're a school bus driver is weekly wage, no benefits, and no pension. No, most of them don't even have a 401k.
So that's a really, I mean, that's a really extreme and really poignant example of austerity right there. Well, let's kind of go a little bit deeper. And so each of you has, 8 or so minutes. That sounds so exact, but it's mostly in the spirit of lots of questions and comments may come from the floor. And so I asked each of the speakers if they could think about their own workplace, whether it's the current one or a previous workplace, and your own organizing, however you describe it. And, pick a project or a campaign and help us understand kind of how you see your work pushing back against austerity, and also help us think about how we can add tools to our own toolbox, because this whole series has been about trying to hear about tools that organizers use in multiple places so that we can kind of learn them for ourselves. And so that was the general spirit of what I asked, but you all can kind of interpret that as you'd like and bring us more deeply into your work. And who wants to start? Does anybody want to volunteer to start? And my friend Miku over here is going to do the peace sign when you have about 2 minutes left, just so we can keep on track. Does that sound good?
Well, since I got the mic, I might as well start.
All right, please do.
I started driving the school bus in 1996. When I first started driving for the school, I was driving at a private bus company, but we were servicing Detroit Public Schools. And they had what they call route pick day. The week before school start, we would all go in and pick what routes we wanted to drive. Seniority got first choice. The least seniority got what was left over. The route sheets had each student's name that we had to pick up and directions to their houses. On the cover sheet, it showed us how much the route paid. Some routes paid 10 hours, 5 in the morning, 5 in the evening. Some routes paid 8, 9.5, 7. The least you would get paid is 5 hours, 2.5 in the morning, 2.5 in the evening. Of course, that was going around the block, picking up maybe 1 or 2 students. But we knew how much money we was going to be paid because the hours was on the cover sheet of the route sheet. About 3 years after driving for this company, we did a route pick day and we saw our routes, but there was no hours on the cover sheet. So we asked the owner of the company, how many hours is this route paying? And they told us from here on in, everybody getting paid 30 hours a week. 30 hours a week, yeah, everybody getting paid 30 hours. Okay. We did some investigating and found out we was getting paid 30 hours, But the owners of these bus companies were still getting paid for 10 hours, 8 hours, 7 hours, and they was putting the excess money in their pockets. And it was all in cahoots with the public schools, because the public schools was responsible, Detroit public schools were responsible for putting the hours on the route sheets, but they weren't doing it. So again, the workers suffered. We got 30 hours a week, but the owners was getting all the excess money. And then they said, if we call you in to do an extra route because sometime a worker didn't show up, okay, 30 hours, that's 5 hours, 6 hours a day. So 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, right? So if I'm doing somebody's route that afternoon, I'm supposed to get 3 hours, 3 extra hours. No, you get 1 hour. 1 hour? Where the other 2 hours go? In the owner's pocket. Oh, I told him, don't call me for no extra route. I don't do no slave labor. Well, the owner got real mad at me, but he couldn't fire me because I was one of his best drivers. But I told him, don't never call me to do no extra route. So these are some of the things, injustices that we have suffered as school bus drivers, and we're vastly underpaid because we got to babysit children. We got to play security guard. We got to play counselor. And then we got to watch out for all this other crazy traffic that's riding with us in the street. But nobody wants to pay us. As I said earlier, we were in with the school teachers. We got nice raises with 3% a year, the normal wage increase. All that stopped because they privatized all of the school bus. They privatized them all over. And that's why right now you can't find a district that don't have a sign up that says school bus drivers wanted. Nobody wants to be a school bus driver no more because there's no benefit in it. There's no pay in it. And I just do it to pass time. I'm retired from Ford. I'm just passing time. But you can't hardly find nobody that wants to be a school bus driver. Whereas, let's say in 1996, 95, 94, people was lined up trying to be a school driver. But school bus drivers get ripped off every single day. And it's hard to unionize because most union officials, and I used to be one, so I know what I'm talking about. Most union officials, they've been up in the office so long, talking with company officials that they done forgot the language of the people on the shop floor. It's like going to France. If you go to France, if you stay there long enough, you're gonna learn France's culture and you're gonna speak French automatically if you stay there long enough. Union officials been up in the boardroom so long, they done forgot the language on the shop floor. That's why it's hard to organize. And with just what has transpired in the last 2 or 3 years with the UAW is gonna be a long time before they organize anybody because they gotta win the trust of the people back. So we're in a real serious dilemma in the public sector. It's a real rough dilemma because the public sector is doing moves. They're nonprofit, but they're doing for-profit moves, like Detroit bankruptcy. That was Detroit, the city of Detroit's municipality is supposed to be nonprofit public sector, but they pulled a private sector move by filing bankruptcy. Who's going to trust them now? I talked to a friend of mine, well, she's my cousin, really. I talked to her Monday. She's got to pay back $25,000 of her pension back to the city of Detroit. Wow. Every month they take money out of her pension check and she got to pay $25,000 back because of the bankruptcy. And she lost her, well, she didn't lose her health insurance. She started to pay her own health insurance out of her pocket after doing 30-some years for the city of Detroit. Who trusts? Can you really trust the public sector? That's why I said, theoretically, the public sector is supposed to be one way, but in many instances, it's not what it's supposed to be. So us school bus drivers, we do our job, we do the best we can, we love what we do, we love picking up children, we love taking them to school, but in the meantime, who loves us? And that's the question. Who loves us? The owner of the bus companies don't love us. Because if they did, they would take better care of us. In the meantime, the company I was working for, the owner, he moved out of his 12,000 square foot home in West Bloomfield and moved into 8,000 square foot home. Bought a Bentley that cost $250,000 at our expense. But he can't afford to let the buses run and warm up.
What's the name of the company?
No, I can't do that.
Can't do the name of the
No,
company?
I can't do the name of the company.
All right,
No, but I'm telling you honestly that it's true.
for sure.
But yeah, he got a Bentley. He got a great big old home in West Bloomfield, right across from Aretha Franklin's old home in West Bloomfield, and he bought it at the expense of his workers. Yeah, so that's about all I have to say about that.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you for stuff. We're gonna, you know what, we'll probably, just to keep it rolling, we'll have plenty of time for questions after, if that's all right. Thank you. Well,
Nobody go overboard.
no, you did great. Thank you for kicking things off. Jane, you want to just keep it going in this direction?
Okay.
All right.
I've been retired from the post office for 14 years, but when I go downtown, I came out of the main post office. I worked in 3 states and in 3 different crafts. I've done every job except mail handler in the post office. And I meet every week with postal workers from the whole country and sometimes workers from Canada, and one guy from Japan meets with us. So some of what I have to share, it's really very universal. It's not just what we know in Detroit, which is bad enough. In 2020, my neighbors drafted me to start organizing on behalf of the post office. I had been active in Indivisible in my neighborhood. So as we were ramping up toward election, people said, Jane, every time we go to meet with some congressperson, you have to talk about the post office. So what are we going to do? So we had 5 actions in a period of 6 months. And I'll be quick about this. The first thing we did was a car caravan. So in 10 days after this draft board met, 8 women organized an 80-car caravan. With the help of our friends, we sent out 2,000 emails. Someone from Wayne State, a professor, designed our first flyer. We put out hundreds of these. So while all our actions were outside the post office, hundreds of these went inside as well as to the people coming by. So this says, thank you, postal workers, and save the USPS. So what we saw was there's really saving the post office was very, very critical in terms of saving the democracy in the end, because the right to vote by mail was up for grabs. And if we weren't going to work and we weren't going to do our job, that was going to maybe sacrifice the election. So a month later, we did a second caravan. And that caravan, that flyer says, protect the vote, save the USPS. So for this one, we actually rallied outside with these caravans. Like the first one, 80 cars, all decorated. Some were just unbelievable, the decoration. They drove around the main post office for 90 minutes during all the afternoon shift changes. Because in the post office, people started 2 o'clock, 2:15, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 3:45, 4:35, 6, all around. It's 24/7. So on the second one, because more workers knew what we would do, they came out and joined us. So I actually have with me, you can see later, clippings from the News and Free Press of our people out talking to the people coming by in their cars. And workers stood on the curb and cheered these cars of people coming by to support them. After that second one, and a lot of that was one thing I want to talk about tools as I go along. I think the most important thing in my experience, and I started organizing in 1962 in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. The most important thing is make friends and keep them. because the people who came out were my friends and the friends of the 8 other women who drafted me to do this. So we contacted people from all the big unions and from the peace and justice community. My local union president contacted other union presidents and asked them to come. So your first tool, and that sounds crude, I guess, to say, but the first thing you need to do is you need to make friends and also allies. And friends and allies are sometimes the same and sometimes different. Have both. And if you're going to keep them, and for someone my age, you have to have a paper and pencil because you got to write down their name and you got to get their email. In your generation, you do everything on your phone. I know that. So you could text me after this and I'll recognize you, or you can call me and I'll recognize you. And in my bag, I have my business card. You want to get a hold of me? I'm available. So that's an important thing because after the first caravan, I made a spreadsheet of all the people who came. And so when the second thing came around, we knew right away who to ask, who to email, and ask them to bring their friends. Our third thing was less exciting, I guess, but important. There was a nationwide day organized by my national union, American Postal Workers Union, asking people to call their senators to press for $25 billion in emergency funding for the post office. And this was necessary because of the pandemic, because the post office had to buy our masks and buy our hand sanitizer and pay $1 billion in overtime because this guy got COVID and he was gone for 3 weeks and the sister was gone for 2 weeks and the brother. So there was a lot of expense due to the pandemic. So that was the fight for the stimulus. On the middle of this, we got word that they were going to close our Old Redford post office. So anyone who knows Detroit, Old Redford is on Grand River Avenue on the west side. So that's a heavily trafficked street. So we organized a big rally for that, to save that post office. And beforehand, we went through the neighborhood, house to house and door to door, and passed out this flyer asking people to come out. So at several of these things, we had at this one, Gary Peters spoke, Brenda Lawrence, one of our congresswomen, Rashida Tlaib, another congresswoman. So all the way through, we have called on those persons. And the last thing that we did, and the most important, was that we had a flyer that asked people to take a pledge to defend democracy. And we stated openly that there was a real chance of a coup in the United States in this last election. And nobody's going to argue with me about that now. But we put out just a simple flyer. It has a 4-point program, which is the pledge. And we distributed thousands of these. So that's what you do when you got friends.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, let's keep going with Praveen, and can you pass that mic down to Praveen? Jane, can you just give that? Sure. Yeah, thank you.
I think we're trying to
Oh,
untangle it.
untangle it, sorry.
So I was already starstruck because if y'all don't know her, she's amazing. Like her books are so good. My students are obsessed with it. I was already starstruck sitting next to her, and then now I heard their stories. Even I'm just blown away. And what's that?
Talking about me?
Yeah, you. Y'all gotta check out her books and her views. So I'll speak quickly so she can go, so you can get the wisdom. But so I'm gonna share a little bit different, which is if you're sitting on like watching this class and you're like, when am I gonna be like an organizer? Well, how can I learn about this stuff? You're already in the right place. I was telling Craig 6-7 years ago, I was in this class and I was a Michigan student and I was in this class and I came down to Detroit and I started talking to people who were organizing and fighting for what they believed in. At the same time, 7 years ago, I was a business student at Michigan. Now, the Michigan students know what business students are like. The Wayne State students is pretty much the same thing at the business school. But so there was a belief that when I was little, and I think our generation was taught this, that like businesses can help us do better. Oh, the public schools are failing. Well, businesses donate to the public schools. They'll improve the schools. Like everything will be fixed. So that's why I went into business. And then as I learned the models of business, I learned there's no way to help people unless you exclude somebody. Like the second you say in business school, I want everyone to do well. Well, they'll be like, well, some people are just not going to.
Yeah.
Someone's not, like health insurance. We want health insurance for all. Well, some people aren't going to be able to afford it. And that's the government's job to figure out how to do it, right? That's kind of the era that we're growing up in, which is the businesses work better. Nonprofits are just a form of businesses nowadays. They run purely on donor funded. And what they're doing is capitalists or billionaires are deciding to not let their tax dollars go toward the government and instead revert their tax dollars to whatever cause that they seem is right. And how do they do that? By creating nonprofits, creating foundations, influencing the world that we live in. So this is the kind of things that changed my viewpoint in how I want to give back or make a positive impact. Businesses are extremely limited and they should not be providing public goods. Because at the end of the day, you all are paying for the public good with your tax dollars. It's your services, it's your right for what you're fighting for. And you can't be like, okay, let's just charge everyone, because it's a big pool of money. I can't say like you pay 20 cents and you pay 28 cents. Again, now we're breaking down the market. We're privatizing it and deciding who can pay what price. And that's really where, at Wayne State and at Michigan, you've got to realize that they are businesses and before they're universities. Michigan is an endowment with educational services, not an educational institution with an endowment. They care more about how that endowment grows, where their money comes from, where the growth is, than they do care about your education. But their PR system is beautiful. They'll make you feel like you graduated making a Michigan difference. And I still wear my Michigan clothes. But again, the question here is, you're paying for things that are slowly becoming privatized. So for Wayne State students, if you live on campus, your campus housing is owned by a private corporation. It's a company called Corvias. So if you're wondering why your housing costs increased the last 5 years in a row, well, that company needed to make profits. I know that the elevators aren't working at Wayne State and you guys were stuck there once for 3 hours, but the company needed to make profit. So this is the things where you're like, okay, wait, it's my public dollars, my tuition dollars, and it's being reverted into private companies. And these companies are making profits on you. The biggest example that I think is ridiculous before I got into higher ed was K-12. Public schools, we created this thing called charter schools. And charter schools are predominantly in Black and brown areas.
That's right.
And the goal was, okay, companies can run schools better than the public district or the government itself. That places like in Detroit, where you democratically elect a board of education, the governor can come in and say, oh, I know y'all were a board of people, we're gonna cancel your power and the governors can decide where the money is spent. So, places, it's not just in Michigan or Detroit, we got places like New Orleans. After Katrina, people came in and just gutted the city. They said, oh, this is going to be our experiment to prove that neoliberalism works. They fired every teacher, majority Black teaching population. They fired every single one of them. They didn't care if you were in a union or not. They said every single person get out. And they replaced all the government-run public schools with 100% charter network. Think about that. They used a hurricane to literally eradicate public infrastructure. That's the kind of place we live in. And it's still happening in Detroit. It's still happening in places in Michigan. And it's not just Detroit. If you go to the suburbs, like cities like Canton, Plymouth, Northville, they have a lot of for-profit charter schools. how do you have for-profit charter schools? Like, what is that? Like, so a company is making money, like literally saying, I'm not for profit, I'm for profit, giving for public education. So these are ways that we can see it. Taking our money. So for example, if you were a resident of the city of Detroit, the city of Detroit got 826 million for the American Rescue Plan. That's the plan that was passed through COVID. 826 million. Does anyone know what they did with 826 million? We still don't know. They got 400 million and they decided to throw it somewhere and they were like, oh yeah, we already spent the $400 million. We're like, where did you spend it? Where did you spend the 400 million? And people aren't considered in the decision. Your voice, they make you stressed out. They make you feel overworked. They make you feel guilty for fighting for your rights. And if you make people feel guilty, then you can go ahead and pass whatever policy or pass whatever budget you want to. I mean, the budget making process in Detroit is so symbolic. It's the mayor picks a bunch of numbers with his billionaire friends. He says, okay, this is my plan. The city council says, cool. And then that's it. They pass it. Like, it's really, there's nothing more to that than the system that we work in. And this is where my work with Detroit Will Breathe has come in. We started in 2020 marching. I think you all met Tristan a few weeks ago. So 2020 marching for Black lives. And it was insane how many companies, politicians, organizations came out like, we care about Black Lives Matter. We're going to dedicate money toward that. But they're the same companies that are going to try to make money and profit off policing. That things like Greenlight, Project Greenlight in Detroit, that's Comcast making money on security cameras that are supposed to surveil Detroiters.
Double dipping.
Double dipping, they're double dipping. So that's where organizations like Detroit Will Breathe and places that really meet out of GBI. So if you just come here any day of the week and meet someone who's in this space, you're probably meeting someone who's trying to unite the people. They have no agenda of their own. Their job is to bring people together and fight for what you believe in. That's what Detroit Will Breathe has always done. That's what other organizations I've worked with has done, is how can we make our voice together stronger? Because the second you speak up, the second you do a car caravan, the second you walk on the streets, they freak this shit out. Why do you think the police were so hard on Detroiters? Detroit had the most peaceful protesters prosecuted of any city in America. Why? Because they were afraid that people in Detroit would actually ask for change. And it was the most calm, peaceful thing. Tristan and I organized some of them. I'm telling you, there was no violence. There was nothing. The violence came from the police. And that's why a federal judge put a restraining order on the police. The police are not, in Detroit, police are not allowed to approach peaceful protesters because they were very brutally violent. But again, these are fights that we're doing daily. Like what Carolyn and I were talking, you're fighting all the time. But you got to say something. You got to ask questions. Don't assume they have your best interests. Because the second you start doing that, they will pull every trick in the book and make you get screwed over. I know.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, if that's okay, yeah.
Sure.
And you have to be careful because they'll wave something in front of your face that you really need.
They will.
An education at University of Michigan, they'll wave something to make you be quiet. I'll never forget, General Baker Jr., he won the chairmanship of our unit at Ford, and he got sworn in as chairman. A few days later, Labor Relations called him, said, we need to talk to you, come on up. And he took me with him because Baker never went nowhere without a witness. We goes up to Labor Relations office and they said, Mr. Baker, you're now the chairman of the Coke Blast Unit. And he said, yes, I am. The labor rep said, we're going to pay you 7 days, 12 hours a day. Now I'm adding this up. 84 hours, 40 hours straight time, 44 hours at time and a half. I'm adding these numbers up. I'm like, wow, they're going to get paid about $150,000 a year. Baker flatly told the labor rep, no, sir. Just pay me 40 hours. Any overtime you got, give it to my union stewards. So we came down the stairs, and I'm green, okay? We come down the stairs, labor, I said, hey man, you turned down $150,000? He said, yeah, Big City learned something today. He said, if I take that money, they know I'm not here 7 days a week. They know I'm not gonna be here no 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if I let them pay me that money, when we go to contract negotiations, they're gonna pull me to the side and say, we paying you X amount of dollars, shut up and take what we give you. And he would have to sell it to the membership. So if you're gonna be out there leading the charge of protesting and making a voice for the people, don't let nobody wave nothing in front of your face. Tell them, no, I can't do it because I'm here for the people.
All right. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna tell y'all a little story. We'll go way, way back in the day when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade. In about 1994, 1995, I tell people this story all the time because this is my first memory of the Detroit Federation of Teachers. I teach for Detroit Public Schools Community District because that's what it's called now, that we're no longer under financial management. I'll talk to y'all about that later. And I remember there was a time in the fall and we didn't go to school for weeks. And apparently the teachers were on strike. And my aunt was a special education teacher at that time with Detroit Public Schools. My grandma said, hey, you gotta come get these kids at the house. So she took us downtown with her and we walked with her while they were on strike. And I will never forget their chant. They said, hell no, we won't go. Hell no. So me and my cousin look up, we was like, can we say that? She's like, yeah, hell yeah, y'all can say it. Cause she was pissed off. So I'm like, hell yeah, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go. So that was my first memory of the Detroit Federation of Teachers. Now, fast forward to 2022. It's a different union. And the Detroit public school system was under, that's what I was looking at. I want to know specifically how many years. They were under state or emergency management from the state from 1999 to 2016. So for almost 20 years-ish, I teach English, so give me some grace. Almost 20 years, the state controlled the school system's finances. And in that time of emergency financial management, teachers were on a pay freeze. And so as an educator, every year I go up a step, right? I get more education, which is why I got 2 master's degrees, because you can do an aisle change. You can change lanes and then go up. And so for that time period, their pays were frozen. And so you have an entire, population of teachers who have been beaten, who have been demoralized, who have been so disrespected, and they are exhausted, and they are tired, of fighting, and they put in their fight. And then you got people like me like, yeah, come on, let's push back. And they looking like, I'm retiring in 4 years, relax. And Detroit is, I think, outside Chicago, I think we're one of the largest school systems in the Midwest. And there's so much power in unions, unity, right? The key word in union is unity. And I want to talk about that because I don't know specifically when it was, but I think there was a law that was passed a couple years ago, which made being in the union optional. You can opt in full-time, you can be in, you can pay part-time dues, you can pay half-time dues, or you pay no dues. But okay, so let's say all of us, we're all Detroit teachers, right? And we pay dues, but we decided we don't want to pay dues. They still get union representation.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we're the only ones paying. And that, ladies and gentlemen, and now my non-binary pals, is what we call union busting, or what I consider union busting. Because if all of us paid our dues, then we would have more union representation. Now, I think it was very important that you talked about union representation, and when they get in these rooms, they forget the people on the floor. I haven't been very public about my union aspirations or my union leadership aspirations, but I have decided that within the next 5 years, I'm going to make a go at either president or vice president of our union, because there are just way too many comfortable people in union leadership who are not fighting for the people.
That's right.
And I have too far, I can't even spell retirement. I got too far to go to be underpaid, overworked, disrespected, and just demoralized on an everyday basis. And so I want to talk a little bit, I guess, about what our union should look like, or what it could look like potentially. There's a teacher shortage. This is literally the perfect time for us to leverage the fact that there's no teachers. And if I'm not mistaken, most universities or most college of education enrollments nationally, their enrollment is down. So you don't have any teachers and help isn't coming. And so why aren't we using that as leverage? And I'm not just talking about in Detroit, and this is where I gave the AFT a thumbs down. Because for me, the AFT doesn't show up until you've already started fighting, when they're the ones who need to be leading the fight. I pay $80 a month in union dues. What am I paying for if you are not fighting for me? I have a voice, but a lot of teachers they're not going to say anything. They're afraid. They may not know how to say anything. They may not know when is the right time and place to say. They fall in it. There's, society has this idea of a teacher. And I know when people look at me and I walk in, oh shit, teacher. Like teachers don't look like me. Teachers don't cuss. Teachers don't speak up. Teachers don't go to protest and, wave, picket signs. But teaching is a form of activism. And at what point, when did teachers forget who we were? And so I guess my hopes and my dreams and my aspirations and my plans for future organizing work is that I want my union to wake the fuck up and realize that we've got the power. And I'm not even just saying that to my union. I'm talking about workers. I'm talking about anybody who is not a part of the 1%. If you are a worker, you have power. Great Lakes Coffee, the workers are protesting right now. I think a while ago, Amazon workers tried to organize it. They need to be the first motherfuckers organizing, because I hear that their conditions are deplorable.
Yes.
And I think this isn't even just a message for public sector workers. This is any worker, whether you work for OnlyFans, Pornhub, if you're a sex worker, if you're a teacher, if you're a bus driver, you're a garbage man, you work at the grocery store, organize. Because these companies are getting off. And the politicians are getting off because they're invested in these companies, or they have silent, I was in Rashida Tlaib's campaign school, and she said, most of my colleagues are millionaires. There's no fucking reason why people who are representing the public, you're a millionaire. How can you know what I need in the public sector if you don't know my struggle? And so I guess one of my biggest goals is, number one, to get us organized. And two, if we talk about the privatization of education, testing, standardized assessments. I mean, how did y'all study for the SAT? You got into college, and then what? What's the point? So that's my spiel.
Thank you. So let's give our four awesome activists a big round of applause here. I'm going to ask folks in the audience to start thinking, if they haven't already, about some questions or comments. And while you're doing that, I want to throw the first one out, which I want to ask. I think Jane touched on this a little bit. I think each of you did a little bit, but I'm wondering, in our title tonight, it's Public Sector Workers Against Austerity. And so I want to hear a little bit more about, if you can, the against part. Like, what are some of the other strategies that you see where you're working, or that you'd like to see, for like how, I think we've laid out pretty well. There's so many things that aren't happening the way we want them to. And, Jane gave us a few tactics, you could say, right? Activities, strategies. And I'm wondering if there's others that you've been have experienced in your own workplace, or that how are people really pushing back? How do you see people trying to push back against what we've talked about? Or if they're not, how would you like to see a little bit more of that, like more concrete? I wonder if you can maybe think about that for a second. You're all giving me I'm thinking about that look. Does anybody have a few shorter answers on that? And then let's open it up. I think Jane wanted to go first. Go ahead.
So I was thinking about like how I push back. Social media. Oftentimes a lot of people don't know, the little secrets about the public. Like, y'all didn't know that Detroit Public Schools only has one library. But I guarantee you, if that shit went viral, like there would be more library. I guarantee you they will hire more librarians. And so so we live in a digital age, just using social media as a form of activism, and posting and spreading awareness about it. That's advocating itself.
One of the fights that's being made in the post office and the leadership that I'm aware of is in San Francisco, but it's spreading now, as you would expect, is people are demanding to be hired as career employees. So in the post office, when I hired in Kansas City, Kansas, I was a sub. I moved over to Kansas City, Missouri, I was a sub. I worked there long enough to transfer to Detroit. Then I came here as a carrier, I was a sub for years. So subs have very little control, and even if you make the same pay, you don't have the same protection that a career employee. So because of what I mentioned before, that they because they're hiring people in and then working them 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, a lot of people get one or either two paychecks and they quit. And that's understandable. So the fight, one of the fights now is to force the post office to hire people as career. And that means you have a regular bid, like the brother was talking about, you're going to have a basic guaranteed 40-hour week. You're going to have a lot of rights that substitute, regardless of craft. I've been a carrier, a clerk in 2 states, and a equipment repair mechanic. We all should have the same benefits. The other thing that's really difficult is in one of our cities, 30 carriers have been robbed, and they've been robbed of what we call the arrowhead key. That's the key that opens any mailbox anywhere. Like if you're in an apartment building, it's the key that opens it so the carrier can put the stuff in. If you live now where they have the cluster boxes where 18 neighbors get their mail all together, the arrowhead. So people have been stealing those from carriers. So you can imagine somebody robs you. You want to go back there tomorrow? You know, they're going to give you a new key. You want to go back there? I don't think so. So there's a fight. One of the things I put forward in that group when I came here, my first assignment as a carrier was a very dangerous area with a lot of gang stuff. So I would get on the street and I could see the gang was on the street. Shit, I got in my vehicle and went to the farthest point. But I was protected first by one older man, and then he went and took me around and introduced me to the other older men in the neighborhood who would be my protection if I had to run. So people now are advocating that in some of the other cities. So austerity, it should be in all caps because it's a pretty serious business.
Thank you.
Things that I would say to do whenever you start working is talk to your colleagues about how much you make or how much you get paid.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, and where I work, I found out that my colleague and I do the exact same job, have the exact same degrees, but we get paid 2 different rates. And here's the thing, because we have a union, we have very strict like pay requirements. They have to follow these categories. And they just simply wanted to discriminate against him. He was a Black man who went to Wayne States. They were like, we can pay him less. That was kind of it. So talk about how much you get, how much you're getting paid with your colleagues, because people are afraid if you'll know each other, you'll stand up for each other. Don't trust HR.
That's right.
HR has been created by businesses to manipulate labor. And like people go into HR and be like, I can make a difference. I can help people. But when the picket line comes up, the HR people are the first people to say, we got to find a way to break it up.
That's right.
HR, don't trust your friendly HR rep. They will always be friendly, right? They're like pharmaceutical salespeople. And then always demand your power in the streets. Because here's the thing, when we started marching for Black Lives, so many politicians came to us. So many people spoke. Even at the Great Lakes event, the Great Lakes Coffee protest, there were so many politicians at that first protest, taking pictures, giving speeches. Rashid Tlaib was there. But the second one, I didn't see a single politician there. But if every single one of you get in the streets or make a noise, the press finds out about it, they make it a public statement, you'll see change happen instantly. Wayne State students protested on the streets. They marched on the streets after a racial incident on campus. And now Wayne State's building like an entire center for Black students. Change happens overnight when you march on the streets. Do not trust politicians. Don't trust your friendly HR person. They're just gonna say yes, but then forget about you when you turn around.
I agree with my brother. The HR person is like Count Dracula. He'll kiss you, and then when you get caught up in the rapture of his kiss, he's gonna bite your neck and hit your jugular vein. Keep yourself educated. Know your work rules. Even if you unionize, know your contract. I worked at a bus company that was unionized, and 95% of the workers didn't know what was in the contract. I'm like, it's in the contract, read it. It don't really mean that. Are you reading it? It means that. If you got a workplace, whether it's unionized or not, know the work rules, educate yourself, hold management to the work rules that they set, and don't settle for nothing less. If the job don't have a work rules, don't have a handbook, sit down with somebody and come up with a handbook. Sit down with the owner, the vice owner, the manager, or whoever, and come up with a handbook and hold management's feet to the fire. No, you said in your handbook that I got 30 minutes for lunch, and I'm gonna take my 30 minutes for lunch. Educate yourself, and you'll come out ahead. Educate yourself and educate others. Because people just want to go to work and get their check on Friday and go home. No. We all got to work together to make our workplace better. Sit down, let's educate ourselves on this workbook here, these work rules, and this contract, this union contract. Let's educate ourselves. So when the supervisor comes and say, ABC, I'm sorry, that's not in the contract. DEF is in the contract. So if you educate yourself and know your work rules and know what your contract says, you'll be a better person. That's a way to push back, because the company is steadily finding a way to violate stuff. I work for one bus company, they didn't even have the state rules on the bulletin board of how much you're supposed to get paid, about time and a half after 40 hours. That's supposed to be posted on the bulletin board. And it took him a while to post it, but we kept threatening, we're gonna call the state, after about 5 or 6 times to tell him that. He finally put it on the board. And one time we did call the state on him because he didn't want to pay us no overtime. Just wanted to pay us 40 hours. Hold on, man, I work 48 hours. I don't pay no overtime, okay. And the state came in and looked through all his books, went back 2 or 3 years, and we all got fat checks, overtime checks. So know your work rules. Educate yourself and educate others. And like my dear sister here said, make friends on your job. Make friends on your job so people can trust you and have confidence in you. So when you say something, they'll believe you. And make sure you're saying the right thing. No guessing, no assumption. This is what rule number 1 says, ABC.
Thank you again.
Could I just
Oh,
say
yeah.
one
Go
thing?
ahead.
One thing I'd like to say is, you all are students, and I grew up in a working class family, but I had a very privileged education thanks to the Illinois State scholarships. So one of the things I found, well, I worked in the airlines. I'm one of the first women in the country to loan airplanes. And my women coworkers, a lot of them could not read well. So to have political conversation, we would sit in the women's locker room and I would read to them. So when you go out there, you are all privileged, all of you, because you're getting an education that's going to be more and maybe better than some of the folks you're going to work with. So you got to pay back for that. You got to represent, you got to speak up, you got to write, you got to help people write their resolution, you got to help people write their speech, you got to help direct their campaign. So I really hope that all of you will consider that, because you're a group apart, and that's a wonderful thing, but you owe for it, just like I owe for it.
30 seconds, just 30 seconds. I enjoyed what the sister said. She said she's going to, in a few more years, run for presidency of the DFT. I don't blame you. See, here's the problem. She wants to lead the charge, but the union heads, they done forgot where they come from. So eventually they think they are, and I'm saying that to let you know, you all don't forget where you come from. Whatever station in life you get into, don't forget where you come from. None of us started at the top. We all started somewhere at the bottom and we worked our way to the top. But when you get to the top, don't forget where you come from. Because when you forget where you come from, you'll forget where you're going. Because the history is a repeat of the past. So don't forget where you come from, and you'll never forget where you're going. See, your union leaders, they forgot where they come from, and they don't know where they're going. So they can't lead you. Impossible for them to lead you.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion, and let's open it up. So many like concrete strategies, suggestions, ideas. I think the toolbox is growing by the minute. But let's hear some questions. Let's hear some comments. There may be some, Carolyn, if there's any coming from online, from Zoom, YouTube, post them. Please stand up. If you can use a mic, I think we want to use the mic still, right, Carolyn? So questions, comments, reactions, a whole lot was just thrown at you. So please, yeah, come over to a mic and maybe we'll take a couple of comments and then we'll go back to the panelists and see how they want to respond. Thank you.
It's on.
Yeah, it doesn't, you may not hear it, but it's still working. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for those specifically working in the education sector right now. Given coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, even though we're still very fully in it, do you find that they're taking advantage of COVID to make changes? I know you said it's time to fight because teachers have the bargaining power and there's no help coming, which is someone pushed out of the idea of going into education. It is very real. So I was just curious, do you find your institutions, the school districts, almost pushing, like taking this time to put you guys at even worse of a position?
We'll take that one and then we'll take that. Yeah, sure.
I think that the schools have the power to do something different, to use this pandemic as a reset and to not go back to our old way of doing things. And they completely just fumbled the ball because we went back to doing the same shit we was doing before the pandemic, except we was wearing masks. And unfortunately, the safety precautions and the fear has, it kind of backfired because now you forced a lot more people into retirement that weren't even thinking about retirement before because you're asking more of us. And so you're asking us to essentially turn water into wine and do it with a smile. And I don't know. I don't have, as of right now where we are, it's bleak. It's very bleak. Retirement rates are up, teacher turnover is up, and no help is coming.
I would say the
Don't
pandemic,
quit if you're an education major, please.
yeah, I would say the pandemic is like Katrina in New Orleans. Like, they're gonna use it to cut the budget, to say, oh, we lost money from the pandemic, we gotta hire teachers. I mean, one of the things, if you're gonna go to the Teach for America or AmeriCorps, that's ways for them to cut city budget. Like, there are ways for them to do it. So as far as, are they gonna push teachers? They're gonna find ways to screw over teachers. So through like AmeriCorps, Teach for America, they'll create something else like Detroit Teaching Corps. We'll have teachers who turn around high. Oh my God, they're doing it. So things like that, instead of investing in the current people. The other thing that I really quickly say is like the pandemic, they did a lot of progressive things that are not free market, right? They did it, but they didn't do everything. They could have easily shut down pharmaceutical companies and produced the vaccine on their own. Because they ended up giving billions to the pharmaceutical companies to buy the vaccines and sell it out. When we had a mask shortage, we could have just like nationalized like Ford Motor Company and said, you're going to produce masks. Like we did during World War II. This is not like new things that we've never done. Like the government, the US is used to like during it, like issues of high need, using the public good, the public sector. But now we didn't do it. And one of the reasons for that is we're relying too much on the free market. And if y'all speak up, they really won't be willing to do that. Can we take a few questions at a
Yeah,
time?
let's
So
take
people
it,
have-
let's take a few now, yeah.
I have, coming from Wayne State on Zoom. How do we empower the rank and file against complacent union leadership? What strategies would you recommend? And then, why doesn't DPS have a radical union in the same vein as Chicago and Ford? What factors are at play that prevent this?
One more for the floor, and then that's already locked. If you got, is there another question you want to throw in the mix out there or comment?
Go ahead to the mic, I do.
Can you use the mic?
Go to the mic, I do. One of
Um,
them in the middle. Oh, it's three mics.
So people on YouTube and Zoom can hear us?
Yeah.
My name is Donald Joe
Just
Roberts.
speak up. Speak up.
Okay, I want to criticize myself from last week. I didn't give honors to all the members of the panel last week, and I want to start this week giving honors to the panel speakers and the audience. I'm a so-called co-founder of Drum. I started on the second Wildcat strike, and pretty much I didn't quit. But mainly what I want to say now is there's some complicated issues going on here. Dimensions, layers, and metrics. The class struggle, the superstructure, and the productive forces. It takes a lot of learning and a lot of sacrifices, period. And this is an imperfect learning process from then to now. What used to work back then doesn't work now. What works now won't work tomorrow. So that's where the dimensions, the layers, and the metrics come in. In the old days, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, they showed, or better yet, they explained what was happening. The capitalists used the steam engine and electricity to overthrow the feudal system. Bringing that up to today's world, the digital capitalist is overthrowing the industrial capitalist. That is the key to what's shaping the class struggle now. And every change in the productive forces, every change in the superstructure, and the rest of that is based upon technological changes, which changes everything. What's changing us now from the old way is the digital capitalist. The steam engine and electricity has gone to another level. Now, we can communicate on a worldwide basis instantly. This makes you young people, it puts you in the history-making booth, more so than myself. My old way of fighting ain't gonna help as much as the people who got the digital knowledge to communicate. And any place can be a classroom. Matter of fact, you got to depend upon that. That's the bar, that's the cafe, that's the lunchroom, that's in the church. Any place can be a classroom. But the main thing that I want to say is that you got to be prepared for change. And the old way of doing things is one thing, and the bribery between the public system and the private system is governed by dimensions, layers, and metrics. I don't never know whenever things was fair. They ain't never played fair, whether they were public or private. So the changes in strategy causes changes in the tactics. If you don't know what the long range picture looks like, you're gonna have problems figuring out the short range things, and you got to survive during the whole process. And I will rest my case on that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Let's take one more, and then we'll see if the panelists want to respond to any of what you heard.
So just kind of like building on that a little bit, a lot of you guys kind of brought like different collectivist sort of perspectives.
Can you
on what
speak
you
up a
said.
little bit?
Yeah, can I take on that?
Yeah.
So a lot of you guys brought different like collectivist ideas to what you were saying, more or less like rely on each other and uplift each other instead of, you know, individuality of like taking advantage of the situation you're in and maximizing those circumstances. Like, for example, Big City was talking about his friend not taking a pay increase because he'd rather his coworkers get that benefit as well. So our society kind of promotes like individuality and like capitalism, obviously, and making the most of the opportunity. How do you justify like relying on unions if your entire, like if the entire structure of the society is based on being individual? Like, how do you justify, like, do you get what I'm saying at all? Or is that like a weird question? Like, what I'm trying to ask, I guess, is like, where do you find the energy to persist with this and like maintain and like when you never see change? Because honestly, what you said was a great point in that yesterday is different than tomorrow's gonna be, and right now is different than yesterday was, or tomorrow will be either. And like the way people were taking advantage of the system before has changed, and now people are taking advantage of it differently. And how do you use the collective to be an individual when it's designed for an individual with the system? I guess that's my question.
Thank you. So there's a smorgasbord of questions, and each of you can respond to whichever one you want to, I think is the best way to do it.
Well, for the Wayne State AAP question about how do you mobilize members, instead of me answering that question, I want to ask you, when you were working with automotive workers who just came in for the paycheck and wanted to leave, and then they didn't want to organize, how did you get them to organize, to join the fight?
Well, we had to show them that that check they were getting every week, even though it had Ford's signature on the check, if it wasn't for a union, you wouldn't have a check. You still be making $5 a day. The company is not your friend. Your friend is the union, because the union was the third party that made the company be fair with their pay and their benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we educated the workforce and told them the truth. So that's how we won that fight. Somebody asked a question about complacent leadership. You kick them out, vote them out. You might not get it this election, but leave a legacy. The next election, you might get them out. It might take the third election. You might be done retired by then, but at least you educated the workforce to get that complacent leader out of office. You got to work at it. It's going to take work. I helped organize some supervisors in Windsor, Ontario, from Detroit, Michigan. I'm here in Detroit. I helped them organize. It was a child protective services company, nonprofit. And one of the supervisors called me because she had heard about me, and I told them what to do. They was calling me every day, talking 2 or 3 hours a day on the phone. But we got them organized over there because I kept giving them information. I kept sharing truths with them, not no fallacy, not nothing they can question. I say, Google it, you'll find it. So educate people, educating workers, that will help you solve the problem complacency. Again, work. You gotta work at it. I hope I answered your question.
100%.
Okay.
Other
I think, did you want to take a question or do you want me to
You want
respond?
the question about
Yep.
DPS and the radical union?
I guess I'll talk about DPS and union.
You go ahead and finish first.
Okay. I did mention that DPS CD just came from almost under 20 years of state management. And so imagine that you were, and I like to compare it to being in an abusive relationship. And I'm sorry if, this is, I should have said trigger warning if anyone who has been in a domestic violence experience. You understand how being in a situation like that can not only mentally, but emotionally devastate you and damage you. And so I said that the first thing that we need to do is we need to get our membership back in good health. There needs to be a lot of healing from that experience. If you have somebody say you're not getting a raise for 20 years, I know somebody who lost at least $30,000 of a step increase. And so I often look at other teacher unions, like I see Chicago doing a thing, or I'll look at LA. And I'm like, why not us? Why not us? And then I have to remember, it's a different situation, but it's there. I remember who they are. I just need for them to remember who they are. And I think that they're so tired and they've been beaten down. And my thing is, like, I get that you're tired, but I'm not. So let me carry you. I'll carry you. I don't need you to show up outside with the picket lines, but I need you to vote for this to not go back to school unless we do X, Y, and Z. I need you to vote and say, hey, we aren't administering any more standardized assessments. We got the power to say that. And they have forgotten that.
We are also a right to work state.
That's
That's
another
right,
thing.
So Illinois is not, which is where Chicago is. So the right to work is again the ability to strike. There you go. I was trying to think of the
You can't
word.
even say the word strike.
Yeah, in Michigan, you're not allowed to. Public workers are not allowed to strike without it being an offense. Illinois is not. Every time they've tried to pass it, people in Illinois mobilize and they get to the streets and they make sure that they have the right to strike. In Michigan, we can let an emergency manager take over a school district or take over public infrastructure. That was after, in 2011, when we had a statewide referendum, and the entire state voted emergency managers or takeover managers are unconstitutional. So we added that to our Michigan Constitution. 2012, Rick Snyder came in and said, oh no, we can call it something else. So again, this is where one of those things where, and you asked about this individualistic versus, America is such a unique country. Let me just tell you. The white European and American countries have this thing called individualism that is unlike any other place that I have been to. When you travel the world, you see how other countries, communities, they would call you the most selfish, evil person ever by seeing how you act. It's such a concept here. And then the communities that were affected, you're like, oh, but they're a communal country and they are suffering. No, that's because the white people came and stole all the resources. Like I used to live in a country called Botswana that was never colonized by the British or anybody. They are a country with no homelessness, no poverty, universal health care, middle income country with education for all students. Never colonized. Never, the resources weren't taken. They discovered diamonds and used a collective society to make sure every single person got the standard of living they wanted to. Now capitalism is coming in with the big banks and the diamond companies. They're even having the under 30 summit there, which shows you that capitalism is taking over. So again, that's where the thing it comes to is it's an American concept, but also I have found it more exhausting trying to do the individual fight than the collective fight. It is empowering. Like I would spend months trying to fight a provost or a president, getting in those meetings, advocating for myself, using the individual experience. But it wasn't going anywhere. And the same thing with as far as union workers and education workers, I try to tell my colleagues, I do DEI work, so I work with a lot of underrepresented students and try to help them succeed through college. And I tell my colleagues that if we work 60, 70 hours a week, we're helping our students. But at the same time, we're letting the university get away by offering pennies on the dollar for student success. And that's the thing, if you get people united and say, okay, we can do the individualistic fight, but you're gonna be spending 70, 80 hours fighting by yourself. Or we can all stick to our 40 hours that we fought for and guarantee that the system falls apart. The system falls apart when labor doesn't go above their contract.
So can I respond to, Professor Goldberg has a response to your statement. It says that elites don't operate individually, they organize in their collective interests as a class. So it's us, you know, our class is the one that's disorganized and acts as individual, but you best believe that that elite class, they operate not as individuals at all, but as a class. And they're afraid of us uniting as a class. And so they work extra hard to make sure that we stay and think that our fight is an individual. I'll go to the floor and then we have a question.
Yeah, I just have a couple of comments. First, I want to really applaud all of y'all for the work you've done and for you to continue. But for those of you, young people that come from U of M or whatever colleges, Wayne State maybe, three of the themes that I think those of you that have been here and those that are here for the first time that you're going to hear repeatedly and you need to hear repeatedly is that this thing about what work is and what you are is becoming amalgamated. It's not just, well, I'm this and I'm that and I'm that anymore. They give some great examples, one of which is strategy and tactics. You need new strategy and tactics like Abdul said, but at the same time, certain principles still apply. No matter where you are, principles of mathematics apply, principles of chemistry apply, of electricity apply, you just apply them differently. So I just want to share a couple of stories, for example, in terms of organizing and what you want to try to do. Because one of the things that you also going to hear is that it's not just a union thing anymore. You are confronted with trying to make politicians accountable. That's something that's very, very difficult. The ones that are progressive, you have to get behind them. I sometimes work with Stephanie Chang and our state. I go out, I stand here all day long, sometimes trying to get elected, and she does a lot of good things. I'm not trying to champion her. The point I'm trying to make is that some of those that are progressive try to help. But here's what you're really going to have to do. You're going to have to run for these positions yourself.
Period.
You're going to have to get your people to run for these positions yourself and make these changes. Because they're not going to make these changes. Because as you see them quibbling, the reason why they're quibbling is because of what Abdul said. They're trying to figure out what to do with us since we're not living in an industrial period anymore. They're trying to figure out how do we control these people? How do we use austerity and all these other things in electronic and robotic period? Because it's not the same as industrial period. But again, principles apply. Use what you have. Use the social media to your advantage. I look at the social media sometimes, they got little kids dancing, doing hip hop, and it goes viral. I'm not trying to be funny, but and she was talking about the postal thing, and thank you for doing that because the vote is important. These are the things you should be doing to help go viral. When he's talking about the bus drivers, these are the things that you should be doing on social media to help go viral. The way we did it, again, I'm going back to principles, just to share a couple of stories. We had a committee man, his head got big, He didn't come around anymore. He's making big money like my man was talking about. He was getting paid 7 days a week on a 12-hour. That's what he was getting paid. Like what he was talking about, I'm telling you, that's reality. You know what we told him? We used to have a whole saying. I came from Jefferson Assembly Plant. We just told him, we're gonna put you back in coveralls. That meant we're gonna put you back on the line. When the election came out, we voted him out. We actually put somebody in that was worse than him. But guess what? The next election, he almost kissed out, you know what, to get back in. And when he got back in, he did the job he was supposed to do. Now, I'm not saying it always goes like that. What I am saying, the principle of making people accountable applies. So you're gonna have to make yourself accountable. You make that, and I'm gonna go back to my man at Wayne State. One of the ways, the first black editor of that Wayne State student newspaper was a man by the name of John Watson, one of our good friends. Guess what? It went viral because at that time, all we had was leaflets and forums and people that were good speakers. That's how he got to be the first black president of that student paper. And when he got to do that, he tried to link the students up with the working class people term at that time. These are the things you got to do. The principles still apply. You just have to apply them a little differently than we did because we live in a different age. But that is very important to understand that at this point, all of this class, SHIT,
Shit.
it applies only so far. Because if you're working from paycheck to paycheck, if you're working just to make ends meet, then you're in the same boat as I am. And I just want to say that.
All right. So we probably got time for one more coming from Carol, and then maybe we'll take some final thoughts from each of our panelists as we wrap up this evening.
Question is coming from Wayne State, again. Following the current, how do we educate more people? How do we reach the community and motivate people to ask questions, want change, work for change? I see a large group who appear to be comfortable and not looking for change. When change is needed, what do we do? And the same person is saying, yeah, and how do we continue to push forward? All right, that's.
So,
I have a really related question.
yeah, please speak into the microphone.
I guess related to that, like everyone kind of touched on like relational organizing, but also
Speak
like
up a
digital.
little bit for me.
A little bit closer. Yeah.
Hello?
There you go.
Okay, a lot of people touched on relational organizing, but also digital organizing, and I was wondering if you guys have commentary on like the intersections of that in terms of like community building, but then like bringing that into the digital age and like how digital organizing can extend that, but also like in a meaningful capacity, I guess, yeah.
So in 2020, in the midst of all the protests in the streets, I asked myself, why aren't teachers organizing? So I made a post online and said, why aren't teachers in the streets? Why aren't we protesting? Why aren't we out on the streets participating in these Black Lives Matter protests? And so this teacher group I'm within, a part of Facebook called My Core, in a week, we organized a teacher protest, and I was like, where can we do it? And I wanted to make a statement. And so we did it outside the Detroit precinct downtown. And in just a short week, I think there was like at least 300 people there, 300 teachers there. And so just one post, meeting people and organizing with them. And these are people who I consider my allies in my school district. I trust them. And so I think for me, that's how that viral relationship transferred, well, that social media or that digital relationship kind of transferred to the real world. We can organize online together. We can plan these initiatives and we can, do these campaigns online, but let's also do some stuff in the real world too. And these are people, when you organize with people, I don't know about y'all, but for me, that it gets no more team building than organizing with people. Because you really, really get to know people. I'm not I'm not a speaker, right? But I'm a disruptor. I'm gonna show up at the time of the protest and I'll speak then, but I'm not a planner, an organizer. My homeboy Gavin is very, very strategic when it comes to organizing. I'm more of the disruptor. So I think that's how they intersect, right? Use the digital or use online or social media to make the connection, but then transfer that shit to the real world.
A Wayne State question. So here's why I'm struggling to answer this. All faculty and staff were up for contract negotiations this year at Wayne State. The university told us there were no promotion, there's gonna be no increase in salaries. There was no money to support. We're gonna have to get a step down benefit structure. And they're kind of like, cool, we'll take that. I mean, I don't know what, it was again, the union leadership and they were like too friendly. Again, the union leadership, whoever you vote, if the people aren't engaged, nothing good is gonna ever happen. And I thought, okay, I was already pissed off and I was like, there's gotta be change at Wayne State. They were okay with it. Well, then 3 days later, the administration gave all of them 3% bonuses. Every single administrator at Wayne State got a 3% bonus, literally like 3 days after signing a contract with the entire faculty and staff. And I thought that would piss me off. Let's like go on strike. Let's bring people to the table. And it pissed them off. And I think there's this feeling of like, oh, I'm okay. You know, I'm the paycheck is coming. I don't want to make any noise. Is my voice gonna matter? You know, how can I make a difference? And I'm just like, y'all are literally getting ripped off. You're getting ripped off. You're getting screwed over. I think Wayne State will be a private university in 10 years, 15 years. I think they're gonna try to run it down and make it a private university. And I wonder if faculty and staff are gonna mobilize when it's too late or now, because right now they have all the power to change it. And I'm still trying to figure it out. So, and I always know the students sometimes have better ideas than us. So if you, after this, have an idea or on Zoom, have an idea of how to engage more people, but it's not a top-down approach. It is working with the people that you're representing, going into their offices and getting their boss to give you time, because union work is official work. Like your boss, the bosses can't say, go take a personal day for union work. No, not at Wayne State, not at most unions. The president of a union and a group of unions can go to every single office, have a closed door meeting and be like, y'all, what shit is really going on here? Let's talk about it. And not in an administrative way. Like, as a, like, I work with you. I know there's some fucked up shit going. We're gonna tear this down. Follow the money, ask for the budgets, get like FOIAs out, right? Get the information out to your union members. But again, people still heavily believe it's who you vote in. And I'm like, you could vote for literally every single person, you can have, and they still won't do it.
Final thoughts from Jane, a big city, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah.
I wish I knew how to answer the question about individualism. One of the things I've not been in this room before, so I'm having a hard time not crying actually, because I'm thinking about Jen and being with him. But I'm looking at that wall. My first May Day was in Havana. Fidel spoke for several hours about electrification of the island. You know, Brother Fred Hampton, Angela, Harriet Tubman, you know, Che, go down the wall. These are our ancestors. And when we get discouraged and when we think ain't nothing gonna change, which is tempting, we have to remember how much change has happened. And I like to tell my students that in my lifetime was the end of apartheid. I'm old enough that it started and it stopped in my lifetime. And that's a monumental thing, I think. I hope you would agree. So that's the kind of power that we have when we fight and when we fight together. And I think the only way to keep your head above water in the world that we're in, which is so discouraging and actually terrifying right now, is to do that, is to stick together and to fight.
In the public sector as well as the private sector, they use, and even Wayne State, I'm gonna say Wayne State because my brother talked greatly about Wayne State. They use the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer. And it works, and they beat you down so bad until you don't want to even rise up no more. And that's the problem we're facing right now. People don't even want to rise up no more at Wayne State. Well, I'll get the check every Friday, I'm happy. But I ain't gonna be bothered with that. Because they've been beat down so bad. Their self-esteem is gone. And we got to rise above that. We got to bring our self-esteem up. No, you're not gonna beat me down. No, you're not gonna divide and conquer us. We're gonna stick together and we're going to stay together. And we gotta keep that mindset. You gotta talk about it every day. You're not gonna divide us. You're not gonna conquer us. You're not gonna do it. And that's happened here, even here in the city of Detroit. When they tore out Black Bottom and put 375 in. What happened was the light-skinned Black folks with good hair was allowed to move to the west side. The darker skinned Black folks with the big lips and the big noses, they stayed on the east side. And to this day in Detroit, we got the east side, west side rivalry. What side of town you from? And what happened was the light-skinned Black folks that moved on the west side, we're talking about divide and conquer now, they thought they developed a class. I'm better than the Black folks on the east side. And the east side Black folks got low self-esteem built in. And to this day, we still got that little divide amongst us. So do not let nobody conquer and divide you. I heard my brother say that talk about your salaries. Because that Ford Motor Company, even in their salary department, that Ford Motor Company, you could be sitting right next to a person at a desk and they're making more than you or less than you. So don't let nobody divide or conquer you. Stay together. I don't care if you got tight with just one person, stay tight with that one person. Don't let nobody divide you.
All right. Let's give a hand to these awesome Dean and Corey, incredible organizers. I mean, the toolbox has got to feel real heavy and light at the same time walking out of here because it's got a lot of energy from these conversations. And I'm sure there's more we'd like to talk about. After we wrap up formally, of course, we can chat a bit. Next week, we have our final session, public session of this series, and it's called Organizing Where You Are. And we're going to have Danielle LaBear, the new president of AUP here. So you should come back because she's the new president, right? Let's see what happens with that union that we were hearing about from Praveen. We also got Zach Rue from Labor Notes, and we have Elliot from Poor People's Campaign, who's going to be on Zoom, and we hope to have, and believe we'll have, somebody from the GBI talking about their organizing strategy in this neighborhood. So we're going to have a neat, that's not the right word, powerful, and not neat, messy in the best way, conversation next week for organizing where you are. So thank you again for being here. Thank you, awesome speakers, and good night to everybody.
I want to recommend 2 books. 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed and The Metabolic Drift by Karl Marx. Please, if you got long range goals, I highly advise. That's it.
Thank you, Elder. All right, so bus for the bus. We got about.